Hey guys, good evening. Welcome. Come in, come in. I hope you're doing great. So, tonight we have a very special guest and actually a very special topic. Can you sue private schools? Here at EFA, we get on order of five inquiries every week of, are public schools better or private schools better? What's better? We don't know. It's individualized. That's all, school choice is that way. If you find that a private school meets your needs, hey, great. And importantly, what are the recourses if that doesn't work out? So tonight we've got, so honored to have him. Jonathan Vogel is coming in with us, attorney out of Charlotte. And really, I hear about you all over the state as the czar of K-12 education because of your background with the U.S. Department of Education and with school boards. So welcome.
Thanks, Sloan. Thanks for having me. Hi, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. Look forward to speaking with you tonight.
Absolutely. So we're going to take a few questions, as I said beforehand. People are already popping the questions in. I'm going to make sure I get them all in for you. But because parents, a lot of parents don't have access to talking about these issues with someone who has as much knowledge as you. So we're going to put some issues out there. And I think the first one is that you're kind of a unique player here in this because you represent, on the one hand, the interests of a school board of a public school system, Cabarrus County. We have lots of friends on that school board, lots of friends in Cabarrus County. And then you're also representing parents of private schools. What is that like, kind of being on both sides of the public-private debate?
Well, I'll tell you, I don't look at it as being on different sides of a public-private debate because I don't really see it as a debate. For me, it's a matter of educational choice and parents being able to choose what's best for their children, whether they want an education that has some religious aspects to it, whether they need a school that's in a safer neighborhood, or whether they really enjoy the public schools and what the public schools have to offer and the terrific staff that they might think the public school district has in their county. I'm very proud to represent the Cabarrus County Board of Education and the Cabarrus County school system. They do a great job every day, and it's a wonderful opportunity for me to help the school district help over 30,000 students every day. So it's a great opportunity. On the private school side, private schools aren't perfect, right? So, folks might look at it as a way out of the public school system if they're unhappy with the public school system or they're looking for something different, and that's fine. That's the choice that I was talking about. But issues arise with private schools as well.
Correct. So let's just go and drill it back to school boards. As you're aware, and anyone is aware in this country, unless they live under a rock, right? These school board races are very contentious. We had the primary in Florida, and we advised some candidates on the Alachua who were running for the Alachua School Board, and they had actually their races in Sarasota. We had a conservative sweep in that district, but what are the roles of the school board? Because what we're hearing is, parents have a different expectation sometimes of what the school board members are capable of doing. In Florida, it's different than North Carolina. In North Carolina, how do school boards work? What's the responsibility of members?
I'll tell you, and I'll begin by saying it's terrific, Sloan, the work that you and your organization do in supporting candidates and in getting the word out about candidates who stand for certain things that parents find to be important. School board members are very important people, and the last few years have shown us how important they are when they've had to take a leading role in important COVID-related issues and safety issues and education issues. School board members provide the governing principles. They govern the school district. And so they set policies and they oversee and they vote on large contracts. Probably the most important thing that they do is they hire a superintendent because the superintendent has a staff that oversees and implements the day-to-day work of the school district. And that's probably the most important role that a school board member has is to find and hire a terrific and competent superintendent. So it's a very important role. They have to ask the questions. They have to hold the superintendent and his or her staff accountable, and they need to be engaged.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, to your point, hiring the superintendent is great, but it's certainly not a one and done thing. It's advise and consent, I would imagine, and the accountability part is crucial. Look, we saw in Charlotte, a superintendent was recently fired. A lot would argue, and I'm one of those people, that it was just way too late. There had been a lot of damage done before that point, and so I imagine, your role is a delicate balance, right? Of balancing the civil rights and the rights of the person they hire, along with the rights of all the students and the members themselves who are making these decisions. So,
Yep, that's exactly right. So, for those of you out there who are considering running for school board or supporting someone running for school board, know that it's a very important job. It's worth the time. It's worth the sacrifice, and getting, someone's got to step up. To step up there
absolutely.
to step up there and make yourself a candidate and put yourself out there. If you're focused on students, if you're focused on educational achievement, if you have respect for the hardworking teachers and staff who are working with the students, then you're going to be a good school board candidate. Don't hesitate. Go for it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we have a lot of races all across the state. Some have been very contentious, and school board races are, look, it's the smallest unit of government, right? And a lot of people are vying for it. And so competition is great on that front. So now let's segue into the parental rights role. I think the number one question that we get is, can I, as a parent, sue for the curriculum? And in particular, social emotional learning, which is state mandated in all 12 academic subjects. And so from a state related, let's start from state and go into the district. Can parents sue because of the curriculum?
No. The way that it works is the North Carolina state legislature passed a law a long time ago that delegated the responsibility to the State Board of Education and the Department of Public Instruction, DPI, to come up with what they call standard course of study. All right. These are general guidelines that are supposed to kind of set the foundation for what the local school districts will incorporate as far as curriculum. So the state does not set the curriculum, but they do set these standard course of studies, and they have endeavored to include social emotional learning as something that is required. Now, of course, the devil's in the details, right? I think social emotional learning on its face sounds like a very good and important and interesting and caring thing. The issue is, for each of North Carolina's 115 school districts, how are they going to implement those standards on the local level by establishing a curriculum? So each school district has its own director of curriculum, has its own committee that studies, various texts and other types of curriculum materials from all over the country, and the different vendors that provide it, to come up with an appropriate curriculum. So if you're a parent, if you are a faculty or staff member at a school district, you can be involved, and you should be involved. You should ask questions. How does the curriculum committee work? Who's in charge? Who's the director? Do they seek input from the parents? Are they transparent? Do they post the curriculum that they come up with on the school district's website? Ask those questions. But the question that you asked, Sloan, was whether there's some kind of right to sue over the curriculum. And the answer is the answer is no. There's no claim. There's no legal claim in North Carolina or most any state for educational negligence, right? In other words, I don't like what you're teaching. I don't think you're teaching it well, kind of thing. I don't want you to go into that. But what you do have is an opportunity to monitor your child's education. And if you find that it's crossing a line, if you find that a particular teacher has gone rogue and is teaching something that is not in the school district's curriculum and is doing it in a way that violates one of the school board policies that, let's say, prohibit a teacher from going into their personal politics and whatnot, well, then there is an avenue for any parent to file a grievance through the school and the school district to make sure that that's heard. And that's very important. That's a parent's role in holding the school and the school district accountable.
Right. And so what we've instructed parents to do is, first of all, a good starting point for parents is, if you have a complaint, always talk to the teacher first, right? It's not an adversarial thing right off the bat, and then involve the principal, make it a partnership sort of thing. But, also before, if those are exhausted, check and see. I mean, there's a standard that all teachers have to follow. It's a rule of professional conduct. It's listed on the DPI. Look at that. I mean, if there are violations, there are certainly channels to go through to do that. And so that's the first thing is, don't try to make it a partnership first, and then, kind of escalate through. And I think that's kind of the important thing. Look, most teachers out there, this is a calling for them. Teachers, it's a calling. They want to help children. They want to help families by and large. An interesting thing is when you drill down on some of these polls that Quinnipiac has, Pew has a couple of them on what the public thinks of public schools. It's so funny because parents will say, yeah, I think education's gone to hell in a handbasket. It's terrible. It's woke. It's this, it's that. But they'll reflect on their own school positively.
Right. Exactly. Well, that's the way people feel about lawyers too.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, they're horrible people until you need them.
That's right. So, but you made a great point, and that is, if a parent has an issue, they should talk to the teacher about it. They should raise it with the teacher. They shouldn't assume that that's going to be futile. And if they need to escalate it, they should escalate it to the principal. A lot of these things can be worked out through that kind of communication and gradual escalation.
Yeah, right. The procedures are there. I mean, admittedly, they're there. They've been made by the administration, but they're also there in large part because they tend to work. And if they don't, there are recourses, which is why we're having this discussion tonight. And so my background is, and I've told all you guys this, is that I was involved unwittingly in one of the first critical race theory lawsuits in the country. It was in 2015, and it was a Jewish, I think it was 2014 actually, a Jewish day school that we took our kids to, took the map of Israel off the wall and said, it hurts people's feelings. We've never heard of anything like that. And they started talking about white supremacy and such. And my kid was, I had a preschooler and a first grader. And I thought, wow, this is inappropriate. And then we found out that they had teachers that were advocating for the death and destruction of Israel on the weekends and coming in and teaching my kids Jewish history during the week. And we learned a very hard lesson, Jonathan, as many people do when you get in the courtroom. And that is that private schools are governed by contract law. Who would have thought?
Yeah, so that's exactly right. Some people think that private schools can do whatever they want just because they're private schools, but that's not true. There are laws that govern all of us in society. It would be strange, wouldn't it, if private schools weren't governed by laws? But you mentioned contract law, and that's really the primary thing that governs the conduct of private schools. And by contract law, I'm talking about the enrollment agreement that you sign. I'm talking about the parent-student handbook, the catalog. All of these documents come together and form the contract. To the extent that those documents have mandatory language, those are contractual provisions that can be enforced in court. So, in the most general sense, a private school can't expel a student who didn't break any rules, didn't do anything wrong, right? There's a contract. We pay for education. You provide the education. It's a contract. And there's lots of other things in between that could occur in the parent-private school relationship. But that is the primary source of law. Right.
And so what was explained to me is that the four corners thing, and I know this is incredibly in the weeds, but you'll understand this, the way that it explained it. While you paid for a Jewish education, doesn't mean we have to like Israel, which back then was preposterous. I think now, it's a political conversation, but to us then, And the case we made is like, look, it's kind of like saying that look, we sold you a house. You didn't say it needed cabinets.
Right. Well, so there's a little bit of nuance. As I said earlier, there's no claim for educational negligence or educational malpractice, right? There's no claim that the school didn't give you a good enough education. But there are certain promises that are made, within an enrollment agreement or made within a parent's handbook, and you can enforce those. Those are legally enforceable promises. And there are some things where you can allege that it's not fully stated in the enrollment agreement, but certainly there's a measure of good faith that the school has to show to implement the enrollment agreement, right? So they can't say, an enrollment agreement, of course, we'll educate your child, just pay us the tuition, but then they do things to get in the way of being able to educate your child, from whatever that make you keep your kid home or whatever it is. So the point is, four corners of the document, four corners of the contract. What does the contract say? What's the mandatory language? But is there some wiggle room in kind of the good faith and fair dealing, as we call it, in being able to implement the contract in good faith? And then and maybe we'll get into this, Sloan, if you'd like to. But there's all sorts of conduct that may occur in a particular case that would raise the possibility of making other types of legal claims beyond contract law.
Okay. I'm going to get this. Let's see. I'm going to try to get this up here. So I think one case that we have, it's a case that we've been watching here for a while. And it's because, I know and love this family so much, is the case of Doug Turpin and Charlotte Latin. Charlotte Latin, I grew up in Charlotte, you guys, and I'm telling you, Charlotte Latin is an institution. It's one of the preeminent private schools, along with another school called Providence Day. I think the tuition at the school is on par with what Duke would charge, as a matter of fact, if I'm not mistaken, right?
I don't know about that, but it's high.
Yeah, it's very high. It's cost prohibitive for a lot of folks, and I think what they sold themselves on was there's going to be a great parent involvement with every aspect of your child's education, and that's something that right now is very appealing to a lot of parents, because a lot of parents feel like they're being kind of railroaded out of the education. So one of the things was, hey, we're going to take your kids, and it's going to be a partnership, and we're going to do that. Let's pick it up from there. Doug has given us permission to share what his family went through, and I'm going to try to get some of these screenshots up while you're kind of walking us through what happened.
Sure, happy to do it. I represent Doug and Nikki Turpin in a lawsuit against Charlotte Latin School and the head of school of Charlotte Latin, named Charles Baldecki, and the head of their middle school, and also each of their 20 some odd board of trustee members. In this matter, what happened was, when the new head of school took over in the early, that's him right there on the lower screen. And Doug and Nikki's children were on the upper side of that screen. When the head of school took over in the summer of 2020, during the time of the George Floyd riots, he kind of ushered in a new way of doing things at Charlotte Latin School, kind of apologizing for racism and saying that they were going to take a more anti-racist approach, and saying there was going to be more of a focus on diversity and equity and inclusion. And some parents of Charlotte Latin started to, wonder, what was happening there. They kind of sensed a change. Parents with whom I've spoken have said that they chose Charlotte Latin School because it provided a non-political and non-religious traditional classic education. So over time, beginning in the 2020-2021 school year, there were changes. Parents were sensing changes. My clients, Doug and Nikki Turpin, were sensing changes. There seemed to be an emphasis on race and diversity, equity, inclusion. There seemed to be an emphasis on transgenderism, and this was appearing in the types of books that were being assigned, the types of artwork that was appearing in the school, the types of things that were being taught, the types of presentations that were being made. And over time, a group of parents kind of informally started meeting and talking about it. And it wasn't easy to do because we're talking about the time of COVID. So it took some time for parents to kind of come together at the school and express with each other their concerns and reservations. Well, that led to an opportunity for this parent group to meet with the executive committee of the Board of Trustees and provide a very detailed presentation so that the Board of Trustees understood specifically what some number of parents were concerned about. And this was a group of 60 some odd parents, which might not sound like a lot to someone who's part of a big school district, but at a private school, even one as big as Charlotte Latin, this is a large percentage of the parents who were concerned. Anyway, it was a terrific presentation. It was very detail oriented. The following day, the chair of the Board of Trustees sent an email out to all the participants at the meeting and thanked them profusely and said it was a really good meeting, that there wouldn't necessarily be a follow-up, but it was a really good meeting. All the folks who participated in the meeting, the parents were glad to do it. They were promised there would be no retaliation, which was, of course, very, very important to them because they were stepping out and speaking. But in the week that followed that meeting, which was August 24th of 2021, so about a year ago, in fact, exactly 1 year ago.
Wow.
In the days that followed, the PowerPoint presentation apparently made its way around to other parents, and folks started talking about it, and some folks started calling into the head of school about it. Head of school is kind of the head of all, the high school, the middle school, the elementary school. And within a few days after that, he had a video conference with staff, and he's saying nasty things about the parents who met with the board the week before, and they met out of bad faith, and it was just horrible, and it makes you cringe. Some of these things I'm telling you are quotes, and in other ways, I'm kind of paraphrasing how during a call with his staff, he kind of went off on his own parents, on the Charlotte Latin parents who presented and were promised no retaliation, and we're trying to do this, and so that was quite strange, and he said, look, we're all in this together, words to the effect of, I've got your back, we have to stick together, these parents are trying to bring us down, they're trying to tear us apart, words to that effect. And I'm going over this because about a week later, my clients, Doug and Nikki Turpin, sent an email into the head of middle school because their child's teacher was engaging in what the parents believed was political indoctrination, talking about the Republicans this, we're going back to Jim Crow 2.0. And they were telling my client's child that he couldn't remove his mask to drink water, he couldn't go to the bathroom. It seemed like pretty obvious political indoctrination and retaliation. And so my client sent a note in to meet with the head of
and at the time, these children were, 9 and 11 years old. This isn't, 15 and 16-year-old kids, you guys. These kids, they don't understand what's going on. This is traumatizing.
Right. I mean, it's a difficult time for children, and then to kind of be treated this way, it's very strange. And you could understand a parent being extremely concerned, especially after my clients were part of the presentation and were promised no retaliation, and that had just been 2 weeks prior, and and then they learn about the video call and the bad mouthing of the parents who presented after they thought it was a welcomed presentation. It was all very strange. So the head of the middle school says, well, let's talk about your concerns about this particular teacher or what happened in this particular classroom. Let's meet this Friday. And by the way, I'm going to invite the head of school to be there. And so these two people, the head of the middle school and the head of school, head of the school is again Chuck Baldecki, and the head of the middle school is Todd Balaban. They meet with my client, Doug Turpin, for the purpose of going over Doug's concerns. And the head of the middle school says, well, I spoke to the teacher and everything you said is false. She denies it all, and I believe her. This just simply didn't happen. At that moment, the head of school jumps in and says, you know what? There's something I've been meaning to tell you. I don't think this is working out, Doug. We don't want you at this school. We don't like the way that you communicate. And so unless you're going to agree to go along with us, you're going to have to, your kids are going to be out. And Doug explains, I don't understand. I mean, the contract, the enrollment agreement includes a parent-school partnership. It's an actual document that discusses the importance. This is embedded within the contract with the school, that discusses the importance of communication with the school, how parents should interact with the school. If there's something they want to talk about, a concern, they should reach out. They could reach out to the appropriate administrator. In this case, the head of middle school was appropriate, and we will talk and we will be civil. This is all part of the contract. So Doug says, I don't understand. I just want to talk to you. Certainly, I don't have to necessarily agree with everything and what's going on in the classroom, and I can talk to you about it. And the head of school said, that's it, you're out. Words to that effect. And right there and then expelled the children from school on that day, at that moment. No notice, no opportunity to review any information or documents or whatever. It was a summary dismissal, a summary expulsion.
So, wow. I mean, that's, we're talking about a lot of stuff. I mean, there's no, I guess, would due process and a lack thereof apply here, where you don't know what law that you broke, but you broke it and you're guilty?
Well, in the constitutional sense, due process doesn't apply to a private school. Because constitutional due process attaches only to state government or federal government. So private schools don't have to provide due process rights in the constitutional sense. However, getting back to where we started, the contract governs the school's responsibility, and if it speaks in mandatory terms, then it must be followed. In this case, Charlotte Lattin's parent-student handbook says that they will implement all their rules, everything that they do, with fairness and in an equitable manner. So there's the word equity coming back to bite them in this case. Certainly, expelling children without notice, without kind of due process. I'll use lowercase d and lowercase p, is not fair. Is not fair at all. Is not equitable at all. So if those words in their own handbook are to mean anything, certainly they must mean that parents have, very, basic procedural protections. We're not talking about the right to a jury trial here, goodness. We're talking about, notice that the school has an issue that they want to talk about. We're talking about an opportunity to review the information that the school has and thinks shows proof of some violation. And then we're talking about an opportunity to be heard. And Lattin didn't do any of that with the parents. And so frankly, there are, claims there because that language is in the contract.
So unless they admit, of course, that equitable meant skin color, and that would be, if you could get them to admit that, that would be awesome. But
right.
Yeah. And so there's so much here. So you're bringing up some very good points, and parents, I need you to listen to this. The handbook is part of the agreement. So, the website, I guess, is where we first interface with something, right? Looking at the website saying, okay, gee, usually, guys, the handbook will be on the website. In my experience, click down, here's this, here's that. They'll make certain promises, right? Where, you cannot mislead someone in your advertisements. You've got to kind of stay true. So that's your first layer. Second layer, as I'm understanding, is the handbook. Read it and probably I don't know, Jonathan, is it a good idea to kind of circle the murky words and literally have the headmaster define it, write it down, and have them initial it?
Well, that's never going to happen. But I don't want folks to be misled, because a lot of these, parent-student handbooks and the like have, very flowery language, right? It's kind of it's very aspirational. These are our ideals. These are our themes. This is our mission. All that is wonderful and important, but from a legal sense, that type of language is not enforceable. The courts that have decided cases in this area have looked for mandatory language. So often this arises in disciplinary matters. Is there, because, frankly, that's when a parent often is upset when there's been a suspension or an expulsion or the like. Are there procedures in the handbook, and were those procedures followed? But basically, any mandatory language that you find in a parent-student handbook is going to be arguably legally enforceable. But keep in mind that, as I've said now maybe once or twice, courts do not entertain lawsuits for educational negligence or educational malpractice. There is no such claim.
Right. Exactly. So the words, when you're talking about certain words, what you're talking about is kind of the words shall and may, and you're going to find that in behavioral expectations and agreements and things of that nature. But we never think of it when it comes to other things. I mean, it sounds to me that this is pretty locked down, you guys. In other words, it's fairly clear that there were things that were outlined in the contract that were breached, but a lot of times, guys, you're not going to get that. And all you're going to get is flowery language. And so do not, especially I can tell you from experience, religious schools, because I'm telling you, you want to believe these things, and your definition of Christianity may be markedly different from a Christian school. And so going in and saying, okay, cool, this is Christian, great. Look, I posted on my Facebook wall, and I think you guys have seen on Libs of TikTok, they're straight up doing drag shows in the middle of church. So you have to, appreciate the fact that even with religion, and then you get into court, and they're going to bring in things that show, hey, this is a church, it's religious, and they're doing a drag show, so we can do whatever we want.
Yep. Yeah, that's right. So there's a lot of room there. So let's say in the Charlotte Latin case, we don't have claims. We don't assert claims for Charlotte Latin, having a curriculum that my clients think is wrong or bad, or Charlotte Latin having artwork, that my clients think is wrong or bad and or not consistent with a good classical education that they thought they were getting. There are no claims for that. Rather, the focus is on the school's conduct in expelling the children without giving them fairness, and frankly, in promising no retaliation and then retaliating, and frankly, in the deceptive conduct in which they engaged in getting my client to attend that in-person meeting, thinking that he was just going to talk to them about concerns that he and his wife had about their son, but instead it turned into a disciplinary meeting out of the blue. That kind of deception, the fraud, the statements that were made in emails leading up to that, the promises that there'll be no retaliation, but then taking that kind of action and causing damages, that type of conduct then kind of takes you outside of, a narrow contract realm. And now you get into, potential torts. So we have claims of violation of North Carolina's Unfair and Deceptive Trade Practices Act for deceptive conduct. That's a very important claim, because if you prevail, you receive triple damages and have your attorney's fees paid for if you prevail. It's a very, very important powerful claim, and it's only to be used when there are deceptive and unfair practices. And so we're looking at kind of bad business actors. We have a claim for that. We have a claim for fraud, negligent misrepresentation, We have a claim for negligent infliction of emotional distress because, unfortunately, Doug's wife, Nikki, was harmed significantly in a psychological manner by what the school did to the children. So we have claims for slander and libel because during that meeting, the head of school said things that were just horribly false and very serious. Accusing Doug of having said certain things that he didn't say. And if that wasn't enough, a few days later, the Board of Trustees sent an email to all Charlotte Latin, staff and families and said, oh, what happened at that meeting that the parents did a few weeks ago was horrible, and was kind of stating what the parents said it wasn't true. This email was signed by all 20 some odd board members. That's libel. I mean, that's defamation. And
because the Turpins are so well regarded in the community, in the Charlotte Latin community and around there. I mean, I know his neighbors. I know Doug. Wonderful family, and so that carries a lot of weight.
Yeah, you bet. No, I mean, it was really, it just didn't end. It just didn't end. And you would think that, well, if you just talk to the Board of Trustees, I mean, certainly they'd understand that this wasn't right, that the children shouldn't have been expelled over this and whatever. But they wouldn't listen.
They did nothing wrong. The children did nothing wrong.
Children did nothing wrong. The parents did nothing wrong. No. I mean, communicating with the school. They were invited to that meeting with the Board of Trustees, the executive committee. That was on invitation. It was professional. Invited to have the meeting when something happened a week or two later with their son in the middle school. They did everything they were supposed to do. The contract even says you're supposed to meet with us. Reach out and we'll meet with you. We'll find a time. Express your concerns in a professional manner. They did everything they were supposed to do. They didn't deserve any of this. No. Shame on the school.
Absolutely. It's ridiculous. I wouldn't advise anyone go there. In fact, I would even advise stay clear of it. And look, it's just what I was talking about in the beginning, guys. I was just advising you guys, look, if there's a problem, talk to the teacher. Well, Doug did that. If there's a problem, go to the principal. Not only did he do it, he was invited to do it and complied. And he told me he spent hours working on this presentation. Why? To serve the community better. So he followed everything. And it's insane. This is Nancy Anderson. Nancy and I, it's very interesting. We both left private schools in Chapel Hill, and we both ended up at the same school here, 40 miles away where our kids still go. And she knows, and I know, the psychological stress it's unbelievable because as parents, and you can understand that, and we have parents out here now who I'm going to ask a question in a second. We have parents out here now that the psychological effects of having to drop their kid off at a school and not knowing if they're going to be retaliated against or harmed is incalculable.
That's right.
It really is. And when it actually comes to fruition, it's unimaginable because, again, you think you're doing the right things right, and it doesn't happen. And the reason why this is going to court, largely because it's an anomaly, because this isn't what happens. People don't act like this towards each other. They don't, but when they do, it's important to stand up and protect your civil rights.
You're right. And speaking of civil rights, Sloan, that's a great segue. There is a federal law that applies to racial discrimination in the making and implementing of contracts. And that law is called Section 1981, and that does get applied to private schools for discrimination in admissions or activities and the like on the basis of race. And I also want to mention that there are several federal laws that historically have only been understood to apply to public schools, and you've all heard of Title IX, right? And then there's also Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 that also pertains to, frankly, race, national origin, and color. These laws prohibit recipients of federal financial assistance in their education programs from engaging in discrimination on the basis of sex when it comes to Title IX, or race when it comes to Title VI, Well, private schools don't get federal dollars. And so those laws were understood not to apply to private schools. But a couple of months ago, there were federal courts in Maryland and California that found that because the private schools are nonprofit entities and therefore have a federal tax benefit, that tax benefit can be considered federal financial assistance, meaning those courts found that private schools are subject to Title IX or Title VI, prohibitions against sex discrimination or prohibitions against race, national origin, color. That is a very, very new development. Whether those decisions will be upheld if they're appealed remains to be seen. But it was a wild development, and private schools ought to be real concerned about that.
Very concerned about that. I just did a story today about the Charlotte-Mecklenburg school system had their board retreat last week, and they are getting a jump on implementing some of these just bizarre interpretations of, I think it's Comstock and a couple of other decisions. One of them is out of the Fourth Circuit where they're misinterpreting, anyway, guys, some cases where to mean that boys can go and have carte blanche access to any place a girl is just because anytime they want, and that parents don't have a right to know when their kid has gender dysphoria, which, by the way, the correlation between suicidality and gender dysphoria and depression and gender dysphoria, it mandates that parents actually know about this. So before getting into the weeds on that too, I want to talk about something that we talked about and kind of change gears for a second. While we're talking about public schools, when we're talking about sound basic education, the North Carolina Constitution, it guarantees an education to kids, right? And so over the years, the courts have come in and said, well, we're going to define what a sound basic education is. We're going to, develop these certain things. Well, a new development, I believe it was last year, was a unanimous decision that came out of the Supreme Court that basically says, look, pervasive bullying, when school boards allow pervasive bullying to continue to happen, guess what? That is an interruption. That's a deprivation of the sound basic education is guaranteed to all citizens. Now, one could imagine, because I'm now back to the CMS issue where they're saying, hey, whenever, whatever, boys can be anywhere. Now, one could imagine if a parent repeatedly complained, look, my daughter is so traumatized, she doesn't want to go to school. I hear this all the time. Teenage girls are afraid on their menstrual cycles to go into the bathroom because of this. What if families come along and say, you know what, I've complained 3 times about this. My child is near nervous breakdown and her grades have gone down precipitously. Don't you think maybe there'd be a claim there?
So, Sloan, I'm not going to comment on that because I represent a school board and a school district. So I'm going to leave that one alone. But you're making some interesting points.
Right. I mean, when you leave the door open for consistent complaints, totally ignored, at some point, that's what the courts are for. They're going to come in and say, look, let's balance this out. Let's balance the need of trans students, right, with, I don't know, the girls that are at CMS. And I can tell you what's preposterous is this particular, I believe it was the superintendent who was driving this change. They're sitting here saying, yeah, parents don't have a right to know. Maybe they shouldn't know about gender dysphoria. And we can best protect students. Now go and look at what happened with Myers Park School. Go and look at what happened with Hawthorne, where sexual assault victims are actually being suspended from school and where violence isn't being prevented. Because the fact of the matter is this, schools and school boards cannot protect all students. The parents are best situated to do that. And so getting back to private schools, because I know that's what we're talking about here, is I mean, when you let's say you do go to CMS, you're like, I'm out. What we're telling you here tonight is, look, private schools are not necessarily a panacea for what ails the public schools. You have to do your due diligence, and that may mean that you have, and I'm just using this for an example, a contract, right, And maybe you will find schools that will be willing to say, let's take a Christian school. You do a contract writer. So it's an addendum to this and say, okay, this is a Christian school. Would you be willing to sign a Christian school with a biblical worldview?
Right.
Great. Okay.
No, you're right. And I think parents, perhaps when it comes to private schools, are quick to trust the school. They're quick to trust the reputation. And I live in Charlotte, and I could tell you, Charlotte Latin has always had a terrific reputation for being top notch. And I can tell you, I've spoken to a lot of parents who don't feel that way anymore, and who are moving their children from the school, as they have the right to do, as any customer has the right to do if you're not pleased with a product or service. So I'd say to parents listening and watching tonight, to scrutinize, to read over the documents and ask the questions, and be a real educated consumer when it comes to picking a private school as well.
Absolutely. So let's say, Jonathan, there are people listening tonight and on the replays, whatever. How would they get a hold of you to talk about some needs perhaps they may have in the future?
Yeah. Visit our website at vogelpllc.com. At the website, you'll find my email address and phone number, and shoot us an email, and we'll let us know what the issue is, and we'll see if we can set up a time to talk. We're not taking cases right now on behalf of public school students and families, because we represent a public school board and school district. But we do represent other, and happy to represent other public school districts, and happy to talk to folks who might have some issues with a private school.
What I've learned the hard way is that there are not many attorneys that are specialized in private schools at all. They'll take on a public school, but they will not take on a private school. You're really, kind of alone in a class alone on that. And again, I thank you for coming on and kind of helping. Oh, one other question. And someone, and it's a friend of mine, luckily, has threatened to strangle me if I don't ask you. Because it's a friend, I'm not going to take that the wrong way. But there are a couple of school districts now where the school boards have entered into a contract with a provider of surveys. And as entering that contract, and actually, we're going to have a bet, because I'm betting I'm right. You're going to settle the bet. So the particular company is Cognia, and there's a contract entered on one of the school boards. I won't tell you where, but as a stipulation or a condition of that contract, no parents are allowed to see the survey. They said it's copyright protected. Now, I say that because it's a violation of FERPA, it's also a violation of a state law and policy. The contract would be null and void, because how can you enter into a contract if it's not lawful?
Well, that's true. Certainly, contracts against public policy would be considered null and void. The idea of keeping from parents something that their child is working on, and prohibiting the school district from sharing it with the parents sounds pretty dubious. I'm not. It would seem silly, if not foolish, and improper to enter into that type of contract. I'd be interested in learning more about that, but it raises a whole host of issues, and lack of transparency, and how about public records requests?
That's what happened. After a public records request, the response that we got back was, we'd love to provide that, but there is an agreement that'd be violating the contract between the school and Cognia.
Yeah, well, that's not how the Public Records Act works. So, that's something that those school boards are going to have to wrestle with.
Yes. Well, you just won me an ice cream.
Yeah.
So thank you for answering that. All right. So, and that story will be coming out on Cognia later this week, you guys. We are continuing our coverage of CMS and their host of things. So be watching for what comes out. School's in session, so all these issues are pertinent, and school board races are going on now too. So I want to thank you again, Jonathan, for coming on. Thank you all tonight. And we'll be on tomorrow night with Nancy. Nancy and I are going to get together and talk about these new Biden trends changes that are coming all over the state. So thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you. Thank you, Sloan. Thank you, Education First Alliance, and everybody watching tonight for the great work that you do. Keep it up.
Thank you so much. Good night, guys.
Good night.